Hey, good morning, everybody. It's still me, Kelly Shushak here, still the grateful pastor here at Edges. I just want to say thanks so much for coming and thanks for checking in, just letting us know when you get here. It helps me, at least it's great. I'm grateful for it because it helps me not feel like I'm alone here on the live stream. So thanks for saying hello. While folks are gathering this morning, why don't we just kind of do a best and a worst? We do this every night at our dinner table, a best and a worst from the week, a best or a worst. So why don't you guys just share that out on the chat this morning? What was a best you had this week, or what was a worst? All right. Thanks for chiming in. Did anybody play this past week? Did anybody practice what we talked about in conversation last week together? So I did a couple of play things this week. I'm painting a table, which if you know me, you know that's a huge deal. I hate crafts. And so I'm working to paint a table. I'm also doing yoga with Adrian and her dog Benji. If you've done yoga with Adrian on YouTube, you may know something about her or her dog, Benji, who I think is not really a dog. He's more like a blob of oatmeal covered in fur. Nonetheless, I'm on day 6 of a 30-day routine with yoga with Adrian. So I'll let you know at the end of the 30 days whether it counts as play or not. But that was fun. Some of you went to Zoom rooms this past week. You learned about Zoom rooms last week in the live stream. Those are just little 30-minute opportunities to be together and to have some fun. So I was able to go to a couple of them this week. Let's see, I went to making focaccia. So theoretically, I could make focaccia bread now, which I think falls into the category of craft, so I'm not sure. I went to hand lettering. Mostly I just watched everyone else hand letter, but it was a lot of fun. And just so you know, almost 40 people went to Zoom rooms this week. So if you haven't tried that yet, you might want to try it this coming week. And several folks have signed up for more Zoom rooms. So keep a watch on the website and you'll see more Zoom rooms coming to you very soon. So I think there are at least 3 or 4 that are happening this week if some of you want to go ahead and sign up for those. Let me just make one other announcement this week. You guys have been so faithful to the ER Eats endeavor, providing 4 meals every week to the folks who are working in the emergency department at Lewis Gale here. And I know it feels like we've been doing it for a while now, and I just want to say thanks to all of you who really have jumped in to sign up. And I just want to remind us that they're still showing up every day, tired and anxious and wishing it could be over, but it isn't. They are still showing up. So it seems like now is more important than ever for us to keep showing up too. If you haven't had a chance yet to help out with that ministry, if you just would go to the website and just put your name in one of the next couple of weeks beside something that you can do, whether you can help make food or make a card or help drive stuff over to the ER, it makes a big difference. And it's the kind of thing that we're in the very long home stretch, and so it's going to take all of us, the whole village, to help keep it active and keep it moving. So you guys have done a great job of it so far, and just if you'll keep it up this week, that'd be a great way for us to go. All right, it looks like a lot of us are gathered now, so I think I want to go ahead and start. And I want to start this morning by asking you a question about a question. I wonder if any of you have had the feeling, even kind of an intuitive hunch lately, that maybe there should be a moratorium on the one universal question that everybody had in their pre-pandemic vernacular. You know that question, right? It's that very common everyday question. It's that question that you ask when you pass someone in the grocery store, or when you go through the drive-thru, or when you first answer your phone, or when you see somebody and you're out on a walk, you say, "Hey, how are you doing?" That little question was just like hospitality in a sentence. It was a non-invasive way to just acknowledge the other person, to make an easy connection. It was kind of like a spoken wave. Hey, how are you doing? It was easy on both ends. That universal question had an almost universally accepted answer. You know the answer, right? Fine, how are you? And that's the reason that we need a moratorium. Everybody knows that nobody is really fine right now. Well, what's kind of gotten under my skin is that even this simple hospitality just feels a little weird. It's even weirder because we're all interacting across media or across masks or across at least a few meters. And so if we pay attention, it really feels like there's this tiny vacuum where that question used to reside. Kind of makes me wonder if we've got an opportunity to make that moment count. So this week I started thinking about whether some good questions could be one thing that makes a difference right now. Whether that's an available and recurring space right now that could hold some PPE, some personal protective equipment, some emotional and even spiritual protection for us and for others. I know at first glance this seems like a lot to ask from a transaction that formerly had at most a negligible impact. But would you just explore the line of thought with me for a few moments this morning? What do you think good questions do? So, upon thinking about it, I thought of a few things. I think good questions offer our presence. And they can do that even across media or even across distance. They can say to a person, I'm here in this moment with you. And I think good questions can foster connection. I think good questions can help people know that alone doesn't have to mean isolated. I think good questions can help to reduce anxiety, something that all of us need. Even if just for a moment, they can take us out of that anxiety loop and put us into the presence of a relationship. And I think good questions have the capacity always to increase learning, to make us learners of one another. So those are just a few of things that good questions might do. Now I'm interested in your responses. What did I miss? What do you think a good question could do? Why don't you guys go ahead and just add some of your answers there in the chat. Let's see if we can expand this conversation a bit this morning. What do good questions do? Yeah, lots of stuff coming through already. You can see it there in your chat. Just invite you to read what other folks are saying and think if you agree, if you really think that's what a good question could help do. I love that one, that it can let someone feel heard, can make a person feel seen. Oh, I like that good questions come without an expected answer. Well, good questions set your own assumptions aside. Wow. Offer space for more insight. What do good questions do? Yeah, allow people to offer authentic answers, to be who they are inside a moment, to have an entry place to be who you really are. Keep thinking about that as we travel together this morning, about what's the power in a good question. Because what I'm wondering is, do you think that we could think together about some different, really good questions to ask from this pandemic place? I mean, if there really is this little vacuum where, hey, how are you doing? Just sounds a little cheap. Are there some different, really good questions that this pandemic could help us to find? Well, this week I went back to look at Jesus's question asking patterns, wondering what we could learn. And the truth is, Jesus's patterns are all over the map. But the stories about Jesus record over 300 questions that he asked. It's fair to say that Jesus asked questions in every kind of scenario. He asked them at celebrations. He asked them at conflicts. He asked questions in church. He asked questions in court. He even asked questions in his prayers. Now think about that for a moment. Jesus asked questions whether he was with crowds or when he was with individuals. Question asking, it's safe to say, was a way of life for Jesus. Most gospel scholars say that Jesus only answered a handful of questions. Some commentaries say maybe even less than 5 questions are recorded that Jesus actually answered, because most of the time he even answered questions with more questions. I saw someone just suggest that as a good question on the chat, one that leads to more questions. Jesus was definitely better at asking questions than he was at answering them. So it makes me wonder what he believed about the power of a well-placed question in any moment. I think he must have known that questions were the best way to get folks to make connections. Particularly relevant to me this week is that there are just lots of examples of Jesus asking questions from the middle of crises. Even when what folks thought they wanted from him were answers, instead he asked more questions. It makes me think that's probably what he would be doing now. One of my favorite stories comes from Mark's record of Jesus's life. So I'm going to read it to you this morning. It's from Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35. So as I read, what I'd like for you to do is to just listen to Jesus's questions and see what purpose you think they serve. Okay, here we go. Later that day, when evening came, Jesus said to them, "Let's cross over to the other side of the lake." So they left the crowd and took him in the boat just as he was, and other boats followed along. Gale force winds arose, and waves crashed against the boat so that the boat was swamped. But Jesus was in the rear of the boat, sleeping on a pillow. They woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning?" He got up and gave orders to the wind, and he said to the lake, "Silence! Be still." The wind settled down, and there was a great calm. Crisis averted. And Jesus asked them, "Why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet?" Why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet? Those were Jesus' questions in this crisis moment. Now, lots of people think these questions are zingers. I don't think they seem particularly good or appropriate to the moment myself. But is it possible that Jesus knows that in the middle of a crisis, when people think all they need is to get the problem solved, that it's not really over then? that people also need a way to process all that's happened. That would be the purpose of a question like, why are you frightened? I'm inviting you to process all that's happened. And maybe, especially in a crisis, people need an opportunity to remember what they believe. Don't you have faith yet? Think for a minute about where your faith is in this, about what you believe. And maybe people just need a relational connection that says, hey, don't forget, life is a team sport. Maybe instead of only noticing the state of the crisis, it's really important to look around you and be comforted by those other people who are in your boat. Listen, I know that we are still riveted to our current crisis. And I know that what we all think is that we just need to get this pandemic solved. Well, that's true. We do need to get the pandemic solved. And that's why it can seem unnatural or unproductive or even inappropriate to do anything else. But is that true? Is that true that that's the only thing we need to be doing? Is it true that it's unproductive to do anything else but worry about the pandemic? Because if it's also true that in crisis people need to process what's happening, if it's also true that in crisis people need to reach for what we believe, if it's also true that in crisis people need to connect rather than hunker down in the corner by themselves, then how are we going to help with that? I've been trying to experiment with whether good questions, better questions, different questions are one answer to that this week. So I've been trying it in phone calls, in drive-through restaurants, in Zoom chats with friends, and even work commitments this week. I've done it with family and with friends and even with strangers. I've just been experimenting with some simple questions, tiny shifts really. Tiny shifts that might just make a space for three things. I've been thinking about how a good question can make a space to process, a space to remember, and a space to connect. I've been trying to think about questions that might do that. I've discovered a lot of other people are better at it than I am. So one night this past week, I was picking up food for my family at a restaurant that we often go to that used to be bustling, where you couldn't even find a parking place, and there was literally no other car in the parking lot. The restaurant owner actually came out to bring my food. I don't know him well. I just know him from frequenting the restaurant lots of times. He's very courteous and hospitable. When he came out to my car, I said, "Hey, I'm so glad to see you. I just want to thank you for being here for the town." And then I tried just a gentle shift. I said, "How are you holding up in this time?" His answer was, "Well, I'm tired." And then he talked about how he has less employees, and so the few of them that are still there are working lots harder and longer. So I thought again, what's another tiny shift that shows that I listened? And I said, "I bet. Have you been able to find any space to play or to rest?" That probably came from last week's conversation that we had. And when I asked that question, just the gentle, simple question, have you had any space to play or to rest? He paused for a moment, like really paused. And then I understood why, because he said, "Well, you asked an honest question, so I'm going to give you an honest answer." And then he told me about how he spends all of his extra time caring for a family member who's in hospice in his own home. So he goes from his very stressful restaurant life to his very stressful other life. And it was this moment where I could tell he was kind of surprised he was sharing something real. So I said to him, well, gosh, would you mind telling me your family member's name? I'd love to just pray. And he said, sure. And then he said the name. And because I asked if I could pray, it must have cued in church to him. So he said, do you go to church here in town? So I said, yes. And I told him that I go to Edges. And he said, I know some folks from Edges. And then he said the name of two of you who I guess go to the restaurant all the time as well. And he said, I just love those people, such kind people. And then that led us into a conversation about all the kind people that we've both encountered lately. I don't know, it seemed to me like a stream of better questions that helped us both have a different space to process and to remember and to connect. I did the same thing on a text with a friend. I haven't seen this friend since the pandemic started, and it seemed a little bit awkward, honestly, to just pick up my phone and text, but I did it this week. And I said, I was just thinking about you, and I was thinking about how I wished that we could meet for avocado toast. And then I said, I don't know if you have time or energy to talk, but if you do, I wondered if you'd just share a little bit about what's saving your life these days. That's a question I stole from Brene Brown. And so the person texted back, and we began a conversation about what are some of the things that are saving our lives. And I'm telling you, I hadn't thought about all the things that are helping to save my life until the presence of this other person and the opportunity to process together caused me to think. And I think probably caused them to as well. One final example, and I don't know this for sure, but I think that our Starbucks, the one I go to every Sunday morning, must have like good question skills as a part of their customer service training. Actually, I think they could be a study in this message for us. I go there every Sunday now before the live stream. It's become a habit, and the drive-through barista greets me every week and then says something like, how's your day going? And no matter what I answer, that barista follows up with me right there in the drive-thru. So if I say it's crazy, which I have said before, it's been kind of a crazy week. And then the barista will say to me, really, what's been so crazy about it? And I find myself just sharing because he seems interested, because he's offering presents. If I say it's beautiful, as I did say last Sunday when it was so sunny, the barista says, tell me how, tell me what's been beautiful for you. One day recently, that same barista surprised me with a different intro question. He said, where are you headed? Now, I thought surely that would be a dead-end question. And so I said, church. But then I felt worried that he would think that I was in some crazy, we're staying open no matter what kind of church. So I felt compelled to say, oh, and I'm just dressed because I'm the pastor and I have to help make the live stream. Thinking, surely that would be a dead end, right? And I tell you, with God as my witness, he thought for a moment, and then he said, wow, what's that like? Presence, a way to process, a way to remember what's true. Well, Brian Bolwell, who's an oncologist at Cleveland Clinic, has done some writing about this. I found it so interesting, the perspective of an oncologist writing about the value of questions. He says questions are so important, especially at crisis points. Like cancer in his case, that's the crisis that he's always dealing with. Like pandemic in our case, the crisis point that we're all in. So Bolwell cites some research about how we know that questions unlock and improve personal bonding. So do we need that right now? He says that's never more important than when people are facing a difficult diagnosis. in which they are likely to feel alone and isolated. He observed that most questions fall into 4 categories. He said first there are intro questions. That's the, hi, how are you? Then he said usually come mirror questions, where the person would say, fine, how are you today? The third kind of question he called a full switch. These are the kind of questions where you change the topic. Now, can you talk to me about how you're feeling? Now, can you talk to me about what you're eating? Those are the kinds of full switch topic changing questions. And then he said there's a 4th category. The 4th category is called the follow-up category. It's the question that you ask after you ask, how's your day going? And you follow it up with another question that demonstrates that you heard and that you care. Well, Bolwell said that he had learned that follow-up questions have a special kind of power because they demonstrate that we listen and that we care. When I read his paper, I realized that he was talking about what the Starbucks barista does with me every Sunday morning. So it makes me wonder, do you have a favorite helpful question that you've been asked during stay at home? Something that helped you process, something that helped you remember, or something that helped you make connection? Anybody want to share a few good questions that we could practice with? Maybe the way to think about it is to think about a good question someone's asked you during this season. I'll give it a couple minutes for you guys to talk about it together in your homes or on the chat. Yeah, a couple of great questions appearing already. The what's for dinner question is, yes, always appropriate. But things like, what are you holding out hope for? What made you smile today? What's something you're looking forward to? How are you holding up during this time? Oh, what a great question I hadn't thought of. What music are you listening to right now? What does blank mean to you? I hope somebody's writing these down because I want them like on a note card to keep with me. What's making your heart sing lately? How could I help make your life easier? In all of this, what are you doing for self-care? Yeah, so important that we think out ahead of moments. What are some new questions I could put in my hopper? Could you just imagine for a moment if we used just a few of these? Pick 1 or 2 with any regularity. Would you just imagine that being enough to change the way we and others find community and hope in this time? What if it is? What if these questions are enough to change the way we and others find community? More great questions rolling in. What am I thankful for? Oh, and a great question from John Wesley. How is it with your soul? Thank you, Lydia. Well, I want to also offer that this week, after reading a draft of today's sermon, someone on our Theo team commented, I keep thinking while I'm reading through your sermon that I don't want to ask questions right now to people I don't know. I feel like doing so, this person said, imposes upon them additional risk, costs them precious mental or emotional energy, and puts additional demand on their time. So usually I offer a heartfelt thank you and then get back home. Some of you may have some of those same feelings today. And in that case, I guess it really does just matter whether people have the capacity to make space for all the things we know that a good question can do. And maybe sometimes people don't, and that's okay. And it's one thing to believe that the idea makes sense in theory, that this is a good discussion, but the truth is, some of us may just also feel too tired and too closed off or too isolated to want to give it a shot. And that's okay if that's you right now too. But don't dismiss the possibility, no matter how you feel. Don't dismiss the possibility that it is true. What if questions are actually another resource that God offers for our spiritual and emotional protection? What if good, better questions actually help people come together to experience something as real as a kind of good grace? What if they help people experience divine love? What if they actually help walls to come down? And what if they are a bridge to the common good in a time where distancing is prevailing? On the chance that they are, maybe we should try to let the door swing wide this week. Maybe we should just give it a try and see what happens. Especially if the alternative isn't yielding much that feels holy. I don't know if you heard in that last little paragraph some familiar words. They come from a song, Good Grace, about people coming together and about walls coming down and about doors swinging wide. Our musicians have prepared that song for you this morning. I hope it'll give you a good way to reflect about where you are, where you want to be, where God might be asking us to go from this pandemic. Let's listen.
People come together, strangers, neighbors, our blood is one. Children of generations, of every nation, of kingdom come. Don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Oh, 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 oh. Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in His blood.
Everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Swing wide, all you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Swing wide, all you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus.
Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in his blood. Jesus, light of heaven, fed forever, his kingdom come.
All right, that's good grace for you. And, you know, it's pretty extra when you've got lead worshipers who will go the distance to find a song that also has clean hands. Just saying, worth pointing out. Thanks, guys. We just appreciate so much the hard work you do each week to make that happen. Well, back to the questions conversation. Maybe it's not even the actual question or the answer that matters the most. Maybe it's just making the space, the intentional space for presence, for connection. Maybe that's a teeny tiny space that's actually big enough to let love in. Do you think that could be true? I mean, I know it stinks right now that the "how are you doing" and "fine" Q&A don't work very well right now. But maybe they never did. So let it be, friends. Amen. Now we'll see you this week on Wednesday at the midweek Sabbath, and also in any Zoom rooms that you choose to join us in this week. Friends, may the God who seeks you find you where you fall. May the God who loves you take delight in your living. May the God who sends you send you out now with joy. For in your gladness and in your grieving, in your brokenness and in your healing, in your faithfulness and in your leaving, the God who made you and redeemed you is the God who keeps all of us still. Amen.